Hello and good day. This is Eric Kraus, and I am joined by my good friend Cliff Snuffer to have a very candid conversation with Mark Gallivan, who is a candidate for re-election to the Walpole Select Board. By way of background, I was a two-term selectman here in Walpole and served on multiple town boards and committees, as well as being a long-tenured president of Walpole Little League and Walpole Babe Ruth. My colleague, Cliff Snuffer, also served as a two-term selectman, served on multiple committees, boards, and special projects, and has been an integral part of the fabric of this great town for more than 3 decades. We invited Mr. Gallivan's opponent, Tom Brown, to join us today. Unfortunately, Mr. Brown declined the offer to participate. So consequently, Cliff and I scrapped an initial format of a debate, and instead we want to use this time today to have a candid conversation with Mark Gallivan. Cliff, how best do you want this session to work?
Thank you, Eric. One of the things that I think will be appropriate based on the lack of a candidate in opposition is that we will not allow Mr. Gallivan any filibustering, but we do not have a clock or a buzzer. What we want is meaningful conversation as well as a reasonable dialogue. And in many cases, the three of us are used to one another, so we can do a back and forth and make it more meaningful. Eric?
Thank you, Cliff. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get into the questions, why don't you give our viewers a quick snapshot of who you are and the outstanding work that you've done for this town?
Thanks. So my wife Nancy and I moved to Walpole 25 years ago, and our 4 children have gone through the Walpole schools and had really great experiences working with different clubs, playing different sports. The whole experience was a good one for them. One of the things I started way back then is mentoring the Walpole robotics team, which I'm still doing today, even though my kids have moved on, just because I find it fun to work with the kids and help them learn about technology and science in competition. So we compete against teams all over Massachusetts, New England, and oftentimes all over the world. I've served 9 years on the select board, 6 years on finance committee, 12 years as an RTM. I'm also the past president of Walpole Youth Soccer, and I'm still involved, and I've been involved for over 20 years. And I was the president and the owner of a IT consulting firm that had about 200 people. We worked up and down the East Coast. And I think that's important to my background because I learned a lot about working with big, complicated problems, how to do budgeting, how to budget in bad times and good times, and how to save money when you can, and how to use your reserves later on when you need them. One of the things I'm really good at is working with other people, finding a problem that needs to be resolved, pulling people into the group to identify the solution to the problem, and then working on what that solution is. And I'll talk more about some of those kind of things in a while. I'm not one of those people who likes to complain. When I see a problem, I want to go after it. I'm happy to say that I worked with both of you when you were on the select board for building a new police station, fire station, DPW garage, and especially the Council on Aging. And the Council on Aging had 3 parts. We had money from the town. We got a lot of money from Walpole Co-op Bank. We also fundraised privately over $1.4 million. And a lot of that was due to the 2 of you working so hard with me and me alongside you to make that happen for our seniors. That's an example of something that we talked about, the town talked about for 20, 25 years and could never quite get it done. But only by pulling a lot of people together could we make that happen.
And I got to tell you, and I don't want to put words in Cliff's mouths, but we all do a lot for this town. But when I look back on my legacy here, that Council on Aging building is something I am very proud of. I know Cliff is, and I know you are, so
Yeah.
hats off for that.
I have really 3 main goals as we try to deal with the COVID crisis, as well as the financial recession that has already started, is number one, maintain the important services for the seniors, the residents, the businesses, and the children. Take a proactive stance on financial security and safety for townspeople. Use the reserves when we need to, work with the state for COVID money and any monies that are available to the town. And most importantly, don't panic. Don't overreact, don't do something that you're gonna regret later. Just, we can work our way through this. We worked really hard to build up our reserves over the last 5 or 6 years, and we will put them into use when and if we need to. And my commitment to strong public schools is the same. I believe that we should be continuing on the middle school project. I think that's very important. And funding the schools adequately. I know there are going to be cuts this year, but adequately to keep education moving for all the kids.
That sounds terrific. So why don't we get into the questions?
That'd be great.
Cliff?
All right, thank you, Eric. Mr. Gallivan, in a YouTube video recently, your opponent makes the statement that the new fields on Route 1A not only cost the original appropriated $9.5 million, but that the town borrowed an additional $3.5 million to complete the construction. Is this accusation true?
No, it's unfortunate that Mr. Brown doesn't really understand how town meeting works, even though he's an RTM and voted on this article. The total money for the project was $9.5 million, and we would borrow it in stages as we need it. I just want to talk a little bit about the process of how you budget an item. First, Jim Johnson, the town administrator, who's doing a great job, by the way, identifies things, works with the select board, and creates a budget for the whole town, in this case, for that particular fields project. It works its way through Finance Committee, where they look at every cost, every item, and they vote on it. They put forward a warrant, which goes to town meeting. And the RTMs, 150 of them, they get the ultimate say in all money that's spent in Walpole and all projects that gets moved forward. So the budget was approved. The RTMs approved it. And that borrowing that we did, actually it was a ban, a short-term borrowing at about 1%, it was our borrowing rate, was scheduled and planned and is part of the original appropriation that town meeting voted on and Mr. Brown voted on.
If I can follow up for a
Sure.
second on that. So what we are saying to the public, it's 9.5 million, not 9.5 million plus 3.5.
That's correct, Cliff.
And that is what I think is being misled in the conversation with your opponent. I will also say that relative to my objection to that in the early stages, it was for sewer and water issues as it would relate to providing it potentially for Southwood Hospital and other areas of that type. It passed by one vote, so therefore there's a lot of enthusiasm for, as there is enthusiasm to question it. So it's very important that we know that it's not an additive in that it's the 9.5. Also, you've noted recently, I'm sure, that Southwood Hospital is now actively marketing their property.
Yeah. But to your point, Cliff, let me follow up on this because you're right. There are some folks who who think there is a dire need for more fields, and there are some folks who do not feel that we need another field in our town, or we need another sports or recreation complex. So, Mark, I guess my question to you is, why these fields and why now? Should the fields project continue given the financial setbacks we're going through and we will need to go through in the months ahead?
I'm a big believer in infrastructure, and it's important to build out your infrastructure over time. The fields problem we've had in Walpole for the last 20, 25 years, where we run our grass fields into the ground by overuse. In 2008, the field study was done that identified all the fields that needed help and came up with a list of possibilities for how and where we could build some new fields. The Department of Corrections land became available right across from the prison on Route 1A. 68 acres. It's a great piece of land. It's fairly flat. Town meeting approved the purchase of the land. Town meeting approved the design of fields. Town meeting approved construction of those fields. The fields were about 50% done when the COVID crisis hit. And at that point, we had to make a decision. Do we continue forward? The money's been approved. We have the money available. We have the borrowing capacity available. And we looked at, what would it cost to freeze the project, and then at some point, gear it back up. And that would cost us more money to stop the project and gear it up in a year, say, as an example, rather than continue ahead. We got great bids on that project. Construction firms were hungry. And I thought, and the board thought, that it made sense to continue. And I think that will be, it's one of these things, we'll build it now, and it will be used for 50 years. All the youth sports can use it. There's trails through the area. People can just go over and, wander through the forest. And I think it's going to be really great for people for, another 50 years.
Terrific.
If I may, just as a follow-up or a continuation, because of the importance of understanding the cost versus the fiction, if you will. And one of the interesting things is, if you check the record, I too was part of that process of purchasing that property. I worried about the sewer and water, and in some ways I still do. But most importantly, the children were in a greater build-out to take primary advantage of things like playgrounds and splash pads and things of that nation that were, by all means, very palatable in that time frame, that are now part of a dichotomy of social distancing. Parents worry about playgrounds. Kids could not be happier. Thank you.
Great. Your question, Mr. Snuffer?
In recent years, there has been a widely varied opinion among Walpole citizens, and it goes even more strenuous to present day, about the continuation of the so-called rebel logo/symbol. What is your opinion as to its use and viability?
So I think this whole topic has caused a lot of grief and anxiety for people over the last at least 20 years. It's been a start again, stop again topic. I went to a high school in the Seattle area for 3 years. I was a rebel, a Juanita High School rebel. And I'll just say that in all my years competing there as an athlete, it was more important to me to be known as a Juanita athlete than getting caught up in the nickname of the Rebels. I liked the Rebels, I had no issue with it, but I was competing for Walpole High School. And I think that Walpole, the Rebels name has a lot of different connotations to a lot of different people. In town, Walpole sort of became known about the rebel flag, Dixie, Confederacy, all tied into the football program and some of the other sports. I know a lot of people are very invested in that name, that brand, but the nickname has really divided a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are against it. I think nicknames are supposed to bring people together, not divide people apart. And I think we need to find a Walpole solution. I think that we can find a new nickname, and I'd be in favor of finding a new nickname that draws everyone in town together for the long haul. So, and I understand it's a very hard decision for a lot of people. They're very invested. But I think if you look forward, again, 50 years, think of that. We can come up with a better nickname that will serve us well.
Well said.
Eric, you're talking about executive session, I understand?
Yeah, let me switch gears and let me preface this by saying, I mean absolutely no disrespect, because I wholeheartedly believe people are decent at the core. That being said, I did get a chance to watch the League of Women Voters debate, and I found your opponent Tom Brown's behavior reprehensible at best. And I guess he subscribes to the theory that you'd never let the facts get in the way of a good story. That being said, he closed his portion of the debate by bringing up a number of unfounded accusations directed squarely on you regarding an incident involving the former deputy police chief, who is no longer employed by the town, and the accidental posting of confidential information on the town's website. Realizing that this is an active case and you are not at liberty to dive into the full scope of it, what can you share with us regarding this topic?
So as I said the other day, I can't talk about anything we discussed in executive session. Because, it's still, executive session is still in hold for what we discussed. I can talk about the process, though. The process that we went through is the same process we would go through with any other town employee who an issue was brought forth. So let me talk a little bit about the process, and that may help people understand what happened. I'm not going to talk anything about the very specifics of the charges. Public employees have very specific rights in Massachusetts, and it's very important that we follow the personnel process. So the process started with an inquiry complaint that was made to the police chief about the deputy chief. The chief did some research on the issue, did all the right things at this point. He notified the select board, he notified town council, the town administrator, and the DA, right along with process. Based on the complaint, the deputy had a choice to resign or appeal to the Board of Selectmen and come to an executive session. Again, same process we would use for any employee. He chose to resign. The resignation agreement was reviewed by the town attorney and his attorney. Throughout this process, the chief kept the complainant and the witnesses informed, and they were supportive of the outcome. And it's important to remember that's an administrative process. This is not a criminal process. That's an administrative process. We did everything we could possibly do to support the complainant and their future rights throughout that administrative process. The victim did later file a complaint with the DA, and that's the ongoing process that you mentioned earlier. I would just say that the former deputy chief did not receive any kind of payout beyond what he was legally entitled to as an employee of the town, meaning vacation and sick time, under the Walpole personnel bylaws. So we followed the policy straight through, reviewed by attorneys, and that's the part I can talk about, is the process part.
Well, I appreciate that. This is a very complicated and very difficult situation for everyone involved.
Yes.
And it's something that you have to handle appropriately, especially given that it's an active case right now. And there are so many people impacted by this, and they all should be treated as fairly as possible.
Yes, I agree.
Cliff?
We're going to go to budgets, if you will, for just a little bit.
Sure.
If you've been watching for the last 14,000 years, any of the TV programs, one thing comes away, and that is, as it relates to the coronavirus, CVD-19, if you will, or whatever, that the science is what the science is. How we interpret it and others interpret it create the various rules and regulations that we all have to follow. However, in light of all of the uncertainty with the coronavirus pandemic, why vote the full funding of a $97 million budget?
So I think two things, I have a whole series of things I'll sort of talk a little bit about. I think it's important to understand we can vote a budget that we support, or we could go with an option for a 1/12 budget. So first of all, our intent is to have a budget and go forward with it. Our original budget that we talked about months ago was $97 million. The budget that will go before town meeting is $95 million. I think that Jim Johnson, the financial team, all the department heads in the schools should really be commended for digging deep, cutting some things that are painful for them, but still keeping enough of the budget intact to be able to run the town and provide most of the services at the same level. I think that's really good. I think it's a tremendous accomplishment for the town. There's other towns nearby that are talking about closing schools, laying off teachers, cutting, various municipal services. And I think we've done a really good job in the last 5 years to build up our reserves, stabilization, revolving accounts, free cash, so that we're in a position to, tighten everything up and at the same time continue to provide those services. The current plan is not to use any of the stabilization money. We think we can make it through fiscal year 21 without needing it, because there will be more state and federal money available for the COVID. Especially when we open up the schools, we'll need a lot of help with that. Fiscal year 22 and 23 are great unknowns. What's really going to happen to the economy? How is that going to play out? The 1/12 budget plan that the state offers is really not a recommendation on their part. It's really, what do you do if you can't get your budget passed? What if you do if you can't get the right people in the room? It's really a last resort process, and that's how we viewed it. There's a huge amount of paperwork involved. We'd have to turn in detailed paperwork to the state. They would be all over our budget and what we're doing, and I think it's important that we run the town. We also have some bills that we can get a pretty good discount if we pay the bill in the first few days of the new year. An example is Norfolk County Retirement Plan. We get a sizable discount to get that money in right away rather than spread it out in monthly payments. So, that would come into play on the 1/12 budget, where it would be harder, and I'm sure there's a way to do that, to make that happen. We are going to have a shorter town meeting on Saturday, June 10th, and I believe that the RTMs will be able to pass all our, budgeting programs, sewer and water, as well as the town budget.
Saturday, June 13th, right?
20th.
Oh, 20th.
Saturday,
yeah.
June, sorry, I don't know what I said. Saturday, June 20th.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. Okay.
As a follow-up to that, I'll just make this statement as a former selectman. I think it's smarter to show the full year as best you can, rather than fake it, so to speak, with a 1/12 budget. But that depends on how well you've been governed financially in the past, and the answer to that is very well. I will ask the simple question. The 95 million now is how much more than the last fiscal year?
It's about $1.4 million more than last year. So it is an increase over last year, but the planned increase has been cut back pretty dramatically. There's also a couple of things in the budget. Like we thought it was important this year to add 2 firefighters. We have cut back in other ways in the fire department. And we are planning to bring on 2 new police officers early in fiscal year 21, which is very important, given what's going on with COVID and just how much they're involved and active in the community. So, there were some things we increased, there were a lot of things that we cut back, and just trying to make it a budget that will work.
Yeah, but stay with that for a minute.
Sure.
Public safety, public education are often considered priority services. Do you feel that the operating budget supports them adequately?
I think the budget does support them adequately. I wish I could do a lot more. I look at the needs of the schools. Even, before the cutbacks, we're not getting to everything that people would like to see in the schools. But we're getting an awful lot of it. Same with police and fire. Our town is growing dramatically, with close to 1,000 new apartments, condos, houses, townhouses in the next 2 years. That's going to have a huge impact on police and fire and the DPW, all the services that we offer. So while I would like to see us put more money into those things, we are limited by, the budget money that does come into the town. And I think we're doing a good job identifying the right things and getting those funded.
Well said. Cliff?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we all take pride. The 3 of us have been involved in many different ways for building of a new police station, a new fire station, a DPW garage, a council on aging. And the reality of that is that was done purposefully on the part of creating the strength in a debt budget, so that all these local projects can be done without an override. That doesn't hide anything from the general public. That just makes great fiscal sense. And I'm making that as a statement for you to follow on if you wish, Mr. Gallivan.
Yeah, I think that, it was a hard decision to make at the time when we started putting more money into the debt budget, because there was less money for schools and teachers, police, fire, DPW in that given year, because we were committing that money to projects that the town needed. In retrospect, it was the perfect decision. It was a great decision. You know, we talked about police stations and fire stations. Both of you talked about them, you know, over the last, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years. We talked about sites. We tried an override. It never worked out. It just never came together. And only by building up our ability to pay off debt within the current budget did we get to a point where we could do it without an override and get those buildings done. You know, we essentially did, between police, fire, DPW, garage, council on aging, and cleaning up the Superfund site, we essentially, except for the library, we hadn't built a new building in 45 years. So we had to really catch up a lot to get back to this point where we're current with our municipal buildings and we need to continue to focus on schools. So,
Mr. Kraus?
Just for, I think, our viewers' edification and even mine, what is the criteria that the town has to define essential versus non-essential personnel? And can you talk a little bit about any of the layoffs that happened as a result of the pandemic?
sure, unfortunately, we had to furlough over 100 people. And that's an important word because when you furlough people, you are telling them and you're telling yourself that we intend to bring them back.
And their benefits continue.
Yes,
Right.
and that's important. So I think if you think about who do you have to furlough, we had a lot of those people were working in positions where they were being funded by a revolving fund.
Mm-hmm.
For example, food service, when kids pay for meals, a lot of that money pays for the food, but it also pays for the cafeteria workers, as an example. Lots of kids stay at the end of the school day while their parents are still working, and they pay an after-school fee. Well, those fees are no longer coming in. There was no way to continue to pay those people within the current budget. There's also cases where we closed buildings. You know, like we closed the library. You couldn't have a lot of people in there. And while Sal and, you know, a couple of the other key people are still there, you know, they are doing book drop-off and pick-up curbside. So they're keeping, you know, at the most fundamental level, some basic service going. But there's a lot of other people who work at the library, and unfortunately, there was really nothing for them to do, so they did get furloughed. So I think a lot of it went into what can the people we have do. You know, look at the Council on Aging, an example. The building is closed. They're still providing services to our seniors. But that building also became sort of a hub for food delivery for people who live in Walpole housing, a lot of our seniors working with the Greater Boston Food Bank.
Mm-hmm.
So there were people who could help out with those sort of processes that are occurring that help keep people fed.
Great.
And I didn't mention, but the schools have been doing that as well. Like if you're a family that has school children and you need help with food, that is being done through the schools out of the kitchen at the high school. So again, while a lot of people were furloughed, there are still some there providing that service. So
Thank you for the clarity. Cliff?
Yes, recently you just mentioned an opportunity to potentially save some town money by prepaying a little bit of the Norfolk County retirement. Did I get that correct?
yes,
Okay, within that same process, your opponents suggest that assuming at a minimum the same type of coverage, they see any advantage to saving money by allowing Walpole to join state group healthcare system, state retirement systems, anything like that?
So let me start with the state retirement system. So there's 105 retirement programs in Massachusetts. With the exception of Suffolk County, all the counties have their own retirement program.
Right.
And the towns are expected to be part of that. Walpole is part of the Norfolk County Retirement Program. They run a good program. They follow state guidelines. I had similar thoughts when I first started of can't we invest that money a little more aggressively? And they're not allowed to by state law. Because when the recession comes, you can't lose too much money in a retirement program. So the simple answer for that one is no, we wouldn't be allowed to join the state program because we have our own program that we're part of. The state group health insurance system, GIC, they sort of have become the benchmark for pricing and style of program. And there's lots of programs. We use MIA, which is a statewide program for cities and towns, to get our insurance. And there are benchmark programs that match up with GIC. I think that for our money, we can get a little more out of the MIAA program, but they're very similar, they're very cost competitive. And one of the differences, we were in a position where we could negotiate that with our unions, which are really our employees. With the GIC program, while maybe we could have saved a small amount of money by jamming it down their throats, I don't think that's appropriate to do to our employees. We want to work with them, help them understand what the options are and how we need to save money yet still provide a good program. And we've been able to do that, which is very important.
Eric?
Thanks, Cliff. All budgetary appropriations are considered by town meeting. Do you feel that this system still fits Walpole and benefits its residents, or should there be an overhaul of the town meeting process?
So one of the things I've noticed, because I've lived in other parts of the country, is most of the country doesn't do town meeting.
Correct.
They have city councils and other boards. I actually like it for the simple reason that I talked earlier today about the budget. It starts with the Jim Johnson Town Administrator, Board of Selectmen, goes through Finance Committee and arrives at town meeting. So we have 150 town meeting members who are voted on at the election for their precinct. So the people who live in a precinct, they've voted in their slate of candidates. And those are the people that make all the final decisions for the town of Walpole. So while I can propose something and I think it's a great thing, or the town administrator can propose something and think he's a great thing, it has to work its way through. And ultimately, the RTMs make that decision, which I think is good. I think that's a really good thing for the town.
Totally out of the budget conversation, because we do have a handful more questions on budget. But what should town meeting do if an RTM doesn't show up? I mean, is it really the precinct and the voters saying, hey, you weren't there for me? Or should there be a mandatory attendance? Because I know as an RTM, and I was an RTM for years and also a selectman, it would really upset me on those days where we didn't think we would even have a quorum to have town meeting.
Yeah, I think it upsets a lot of people. If you look at the voting list and who shows up at all the meetings over a 3-year time span, most of the people show up all the time, or
Right.
nearly all the time. And then there seem to be 20 people, 25 people, maybe they took a new job, maybe they should step back and let somebody else take the position. Maybe they just lost interest, which I think is a bad thing. They're there to represent the precinct that they come from and the citizens of Walpole, and I think there should be a recourse. But there really isn't anything that can be done other than them getting voted out the next time.
Okay, let's turn back to the budget. Cliff?
Okay. One of the concepts of creating a very skinny budget, if you will, the town administrator did not fund, placed zero into our OPEB account, other post-employee benefits. Why not, if I may ask?
So there's two parts to OPEB. The first part is we pay our current OPEB obligation within the current budget every year. So that's the way it's historically been done in all the cities and towns and for the MBTA and all municipal authorities in Massachusetts. The state has asked, but not required, that each organization, city, state, town, MBTA, you name it, and the state itself, start to pre-fund our future obligations. Walpole took this seriously probably about 6 or 7 years ago and started to pre-fund our future obligations. And we have about $4 million in that account. We're about average with most cities and towns. And while I would like to see us continue to do that, like stabilization, I think are items that can be pulled out of this year's budget to preserve that cash in case we need it next year. That's not saying I'm giving up or the town is giving up on building those reserves for the future obligations, because we need to, we should, and we will.
Great. I'm going to ask you what I categorize a holy grail question, because I know this was something I wanted to do when I was a selectman. You've wanted to do it. There's probably a dozen other selectmen that always talk about this, but we haven't seemed to really get it right yet. And that is, how can we grow the commercial industrial tax base, number one, and use some of that money and some of that power to improve our downtown?
So I think that Walpole has a limited amount of commercial and industrial land. And, you know, we have the whole 40B problem that I'm sure we'll talk to eventually.
Yeah, we get into that. in a minute.
Where 40Bs can come in and bypass local zoning. So some of these 40B apartment complexes are going into land that would be better used, from my point of view, for industrial commercial. So we need to solve the 40B problem. I'll give you an example of something I did support. Walpole and the state worked together to keep Siemens in Walpole. Siemens invested $300 million in the project to expand over there. They're creating hundreds and hundreds of new jobs. You know, there's a good example of Siemens owned the land, nobody else could do anything on it. And it was awesome to be able to help offer them a TIF, you know, so Walpole gave up some short-term tax revenue to get them to invest. The state gave up a lot of tax revenue to get them to invest. I know it was a controversial item at the time, and some people still complain about it, but it does lock Siemens into that facility, and it does generate a lot of revenue over time. And a little side note is, you may have noticed in the newspaper, that facility has created some of the COVID antibody tests, and they're awaiting FDA approval, and as soon as they have approval, they'll be able to produce 10 million tests a month.
I will
run through their machines, which is awesome.
Which puts a smile on my face, puts a smile on Cliff's face. Both Cliff and I and you
Yes.
were proponents of this. I don't think this is a controversial issue at all. As you said, if this was a new parcel of land that anyone could go on, we would never have given a TIF like that. However, this was their land. It wasn't as if another business could build on that land or relocate on that land. And it was really smart, not only for Siemens, not only for the town of Walpole, the cottage industries supporting it. And look, you know what? They get FDA approval. They're going to be saving lives because of what we did.
Yep. So you also mentioned downtown, and you know, while I'm not completely comfortable with the amount of building downtown in terms of apartments all at once, that wasn't a choice the select board had. They had the rights to work through planning board and get those projects approved. But between the two downtown apartments and the condos on East Street, there'll be close to 1,000 new people within walking distance, which I think will really be a great thing for the downtown. The restaurants will flourish, the stores, the little businesses. There'll be a lot more people available. And I think that we can help as a town to make the downtown area walkable, and manage the pedestrian flow better. I'm also in favor of trying to, get some of our sites on Route 1, some of the other sites on 1A, and in our business parks, to add new companies. But it's hard. There's not a lot of great land. A lot of the land has issues, and we just need to keep working hard at that.
Terrific. Cliff?
Yes, if I can just, gentlemen, add for 2 seconds. The Siemens fabulous announcement has yielded a high degree of respect for their company, their location, and the people of the town of Walpole. Moving on, do you support, Mr. Gallivan, the current rate of residential taxation in the town of Walpole? And if so, what do you feel is the benefit to its residents? And if not, what specific budget cuts would you seek to reduce taxes?
So, I think the current residential tax rate is about right. The residents ask for a lot. They ask for it every year. They ask for it by asking the schools for more. The townspeople have voted for the RTMs, which ultimately get to approve that. The townspeople have asked for strong police and fire, strong public schools, great support for our council on aging. We have a great library. We have good recreation and fields. We have a good DPW department. So the fact that they're asking for more says the level of services we have is good. It's easy to say you want less taxes. And the thing I always ask people is, what do you want to cut out? And I've used the example like, well, we need to cut something out of the budget. All right, do you want to give up your trash service? No, I don't. Okay, do you want to give up streetlights? No. Do you want to give up snow plowing? No. So you just go down that list and they want lower taxes, but they don't know what they want cut out, which probably means we're offering just about the right mix of services in the town, and we keep working hard every year to cut back on those costs and still provide great value.
Mark, because of the coronavirus, the economy is in dire shape. State aid to Walpole is likely to be cut. Revenue from local receipts is expected to decline sharply. How do you balance that with where the town budget is today and where it needs to be?
And I think that's the process we've been going through over the last month is, what can we count on for revenue? The state told us what they were going to give us a couple of months ago in state aid. They've already said, we can't give you that. But we don't really know what number they're going to give us. And we're using sort of the suggested number, which is about a 10% cut in state aid. So which is one of the reasons we have to cut back. We know motor vehicle sales are dropping, hotel sales, meals tax. We can look across the board, so that's why we needed to cut back on a lot of things. So I think tightening up on the budgets, holding off on some capital projects, holding them to a future year just so we can sort of wait and see what happens. It is painful to make these cuts in these budgets because it does affect services. And I think I mentioned earlier, we did decide that it's very important to add the 2 firefighters that have already been added, and we have 2 new police officers coming on board next year. We had plans for more in police and fire, but we sort of scaled it back to that. And the same thing is going on in the schools. They're cutting back on what they were hoping to be able to do, and they'll find a way to make do with what they have. So I think it will all work out.
Mark, along those same lines, I think everybody, especially with this pandemic, is very sensitive to public safety. And once again, on every TV channel, every night, you'll just see craziness taking place in the entire country. By funding police and fire and public safety, I believe you're certainly headed in the proper and correct destination. But with the town's budget always being attacked, have you a group or a group of personnel that appear to be potentially capable of leaving the employment of the town of Walpole?
You're saying are there people that...
Are considered non-essential?
I would say most of the people that are employed by the town, certainly in the COVID realm where we close buildings, we have some who have needed to be furloughed, which is unfortunate. I think most of the other employees, once we get back up to speed, are needed, and we're using those employees to offer services that are important. We have cut back for next year, as an example, on hours for quite a few employees to make the budget work, but yet still keep those services available to the town.
Great. Let me go back to one of the points you made earlier, and it relates to the stabilization fund. The town has nearly $5 million in the stabilization fund, and given where we are right now, should we deploy those funds now to prevent budget cuts, or should those funds be saved for future budget years?
I think that's a real balancing act. I think that I was committed, and I think we as a team were committed to not using stabilization funds if we could avoid it, because it's potentially that fiscal year 22 could be much tighter than fiscal year 21. So sort of keep them available, keep them ready, keep them in reserve in case, revenue, state revenue especially, falls off the table for fiscal year 22.
Cliff?
Yeah, Mark, Eric, I'll consider that a partial answer to what I was looking at. So if you would like to look at new school,
Okay, sure.
and we'll take it from there and move on.
Yeah, why don't we go to another hotbed issue in our
Sure.
town? Do you support the current Massachusetts School Building Authority's process for a new middle school building that town meeting and the select board have approved and are currently moving forward with?
Yes, I do. I mean, the town is working with the state. We put a committee together to look at the needs of the Byrd Middle School, which is 60 years old, or potentially both middle schools, which are both 60 years old, and come up with a plan for a modern middle school that accommodates collaborative learning and different workspaces and proper spaces for SPED and all those kind of things. So I fully support it, and I will support whatever their recommendation is. Personally, I'd probably like to see a brand new middle school, but if their recommendation is to make a major renovation because that's less expensive and can get us to the same standard, I'll support their decision.
Terrific.
Eric, I'll pick up on your fine question and seek something a little bit different.
Sure.
With respect to the building authorities, the SBAB, for example, and all of the current iterations of what coronavirus is doing to all of us, I'm guessing that the plans that people look at are what we would call traditional school plans, and that based on social distancing, we now need to look at those buildings somewhat differently, I would think. So how are you, to the architects, addressing that?
So we've brought on board, an OPM, the owner's project manager, onto this project, and they're going through a process right now where they just identified the architects and engineers, and we actually voted that at our last meeting. So I think that's a big thing they're going to have to take a look at. We were planning on a much more modern middle school, taking into account all of the needs of a modern student. I think that's going to also make them take a look at what do you do with COVID-19, and what if it lasts for many years and they have to rethink. So I think they're really going to have to dig into that issue and think about options. I don't know. I'm not an architect and I'm not in the schools enough to know, but I hope working with the state, they can come up with the right alternatives for us.
I think that's going to be a major contention for all of you, because the science is as the science is, and the various experts seem to be changing every 30 days or so, and I can see the difficulty in doing it. Would you support a debt exclusion override for a new middle school?
Yes. And we were able to do police, fire, council on aging, DPW garage within the current budget, not needed override. A middle school is a whole much bigger project, and I don't see any way we could ever do that within the current budget. So yes, I would support a debt exclusion override for a middle school.
And at town meeting, is that a 2/3 vote?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, thank you. Eric,
Cliff, I'm going to turn to housing, if that's okay with you.
by all means.
Mark, on the issue of so many new 40Bs, do you support their development in Walpole? And if not, what can we do to curtail their growth?
So the issue with 40Bs is 40Bs get to bypass local zoning and they get approved by the state.
Correct.
The town has very little to say about them.
And every town,
Every town goes through the same thing.
right,
But many towns have gotten up to 10% affordable housing. And once you pass the 10% threshold, then 40Bs can't do anything by right. They have to go through the proper zoning process. They may negotiate a 40R solution, but basically we regain our control. So it's very important for us to gain control over 40Bs by getting to the 10% threshold for affordable housing.
With respect to that 10%, as a 40B comes into the town of Walpole, and right now we're looking at the following. We're looking at Summer Street in the South Walpole area, and they are looking at 300 units presently, but they very quickly started to look towards their future and wanted to start to request to the 400. In addition, there's 40 or so on Burns Avenue and several 8s and 10s floating around that now give us the opportunity for, based on proven population studies, 400 to 500 school-age students to come to the town of Walpole. It is my opinion, and I have shared this, that the 276 more 40B dwelling units creates the 10%. The petitioners on Summer Street would argue that they'll bring us to the positive end of that. My opinion is, and has the town looked at this, that 276 would lower their 300 and 400 request, and that it is based on the time that the application was placed in front of the appropriate boards. I think we should challenge it and challenge it strenuously.
So I understand where you're coming from, Cliff, but everything I've seen lately says that even with all these projects completed, we will be just under the 10% limit. And I know there was going to be a presentation at town meeting to talk about all the facts and figures for this, and we've postponed that to the fall because we're just going to deal with budget issues. But I think it's important for all of us to dig into those numbers and figure out how we get to the 10%.
And we need to get it right.
Yeah.
Great.
And the Select Board created a group called the Housing Partnership Committee. They have suggested wide-ranging, dramatic changes, in my opinion, as to how land should be used and who should be living on that land. They are creating, which in my opinion is the new normal for what I'll call socialistic progress. With respect to a housing partnership, shouldn't this go where it affects every citizen in the town of Walpole to the voter for an opinion?
So I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that bringing this before the RTMs is the way to do it. The RTMs, 150 people, have the ability to get up to speed, do their research, listen to the facts. When you open things up to all voters, in this particular case, I don't think most of them will have had the time or the ability to do the research or follow the meetings. So I think it's better to go through the RTM process. Although, I think there could be great debate over that topic, as either way could work.
If I may,
Please.
with all deference to your abilities, I am not of that opinion. In my particular case, I've went to several of the housing partnership meetings, and the reality is I have no idea how there has been hundreds and hundreds of hours of conversation with well-intentioned guests in the audience, myself included, that an RTM member can possibly, in a 3-minute dialogue, make any point on this subject. I believe it should go to the voters, so we'll stay respectful and disagree. Mr. Kraus.
With that, let us, we have a kind of a hodgepodge of a handful of questions, so let's turn to them now. The first, your opponent, Mr. Brown, is a veteran of the Marine Corps, and I personally thank him for his service. When you went through your background, you didn't mention the military. Did you serve?
No, I did not serve. But, I do have great respect for those who have served. I have relatives who have served, cousins who have served. I also told Mr. Brown the other night that I appreciated his service, and I really appreciate what he's been working on recently, which is helping to feed, especially the veterans, through their program run out of Gillette. So I did mention that I give him a lot of credit for that.
Oh, I think he's done a terrific job. There are other people in Walpole that never forget. And with a veteran community and as rich in our town, I really appreciate his efforts, and I appreciate the efforts of all of our veterans, and I also appreciate the efforts of the town's veteran officers. So,
Yep.
Cliff?
If I can pick up on that,
Sure.
I will tell you something I've always told my children. I was in the Naval Air, and under my leadership, the Cape was never invaded.
Thank you for that.
Good to
I will
know.
tell you this, and thank you for your service. It's an incredible fraternity, and unfortunately, I will never be able to be part of it. And anyone who has served in our country and protected what our liberties are should be commended.
I agree.
Let me move on. Your opponent claims a mantra that he, and not you, brings the following attributes to the Select Board: transparency, responsible spending, and accountability. While I want you to respond to each claim, I see that he has never served on the Board of Selectmen, so it is your unique answer that I'm interested in. Transparency, responsible spending, and accountability.
So transparency, I've always worked hard to be open and available to everybody, whether that's a group that wanted to come talk on an issue or an individual who wanted to come talk about a problem. And I think it's important to be able to do that. I do believe in following all of the state ethics laws, especially the ones that work around executive session. Just because somebody wants to know what we talked about at executive session doesn't mean that we're allowed to give that information up until it's the right point. So I know that, my opponent has said we need transparency, you need to tell us everything that's going on in executive session. And in fact, one of the select men did that, gave up information that never should have been given up and violated the state ethics law. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow the rules and the laws and make sure that happens. Responsible spending, we've talked a lot about spending. How do we provide the best value for the money? I think this is also a case where most people in town, most of the select people, most of the FinCom, most of the town meeting members are in tune with the services that we're offering. And that's what's important. We spend the money that we need to spend to provide the services the residents, business owners, and families want and need. And that to me is the judgment. And while you can say we want to cut taxes by 10%, the next question is really hard. What do you want to cut? And we can never get agreement on what that might be, so it will never happen at town meeting. I think our TMs do a great job, by the way. They have a hard job and they work hard. Everything I do is fully accountable. As you know, I like to work as a part of a team. I'm very open. Anybody who wants to work with us on a project. We were, when Cliff and I and Eric worked on the Council on Aging building, we were begging people to work with us to help get that done. And after it's done and it's a done deal and it's up and running and everybody talks about how they were so involved in the process, which is great. But we were begging people at the beginning to get involved. And I think that's accountability. Get others involved in all the things that we're working on. It's not me making a decision and pushing it all the way through to town meeting. It's me working with a group of people like both of you to come up with the right idea and help make it happen.
Great. Stick with the senior center.
Sure.
And I'll start with full disclosure. Cliff, you, myself, and our families were huge supporters as well as financial contributors to the development of the Walpole Cooperative Bank Senior Center on South Street. The center was designed for social interaction, not social distancing. When is it going to be open, and what is that going to look like, given COVID-19 and the pandemic and protecting our citizens?
I think this is a really hard one. This is going to be a really hard building to get open and looking like it used to be. If you look at the COVID deaths in Massachusetts, I believe the number's around 60% are people in this age group. Mm-hmm. Whether they were in a healthcare facility or a nursing home or independent living, those are the people that have passed away and gotten really, really sick. Others who didn't pass away. I think we need to make sure that we protect people. I have noticed my parents live locally at New Pond, and they are starting to do some outside activities where small groups of their residents can meet outdoors and do some things. So I think we're going to have to work our way into it. One of the things we built there is a beautiful patio in the backyard, and maybe we can look at some programs for small groups of people to get together, socially interact, that are out back. But I think it's going to be a tough one because we can't make a mistake with this age group or it will be devastating. So,
Cliff?
As part of that age group, I can assure you that you see, again, a functional dichotomy of how a senior feels about this. I can suggest to you things that you already know, but maybe the general public doesn't. And that is, within 6 months, 1,200 new people signed up to become part of the senior center. That is because of the way it was designed, and it was designed for social interaction. I don't think it's going to be a major step to create it for social distancing at some logical point. However, everybody who says the science is, will also say, I love my loved one, and I'm not going to take a shot at this. So that may take a while, and trust me when I tell you, I traverse the back patio every day, and I miss it, as do many other people. Eric, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I couldn't agree more. I know in my business, we're purchasing and installing a lot of plexiglass. Virtual ideas and involvement are an all-time high, and we just have to figure it out. I mean, the three of us put a lot of sweat equity, as did Rich McCarthy and a whole host of other people, to build this wonderful building. But you're also building an idea, and you're building an opportunity. And if we can't put people in the building itself, we better bring that building in very creative ways to the people. So with that, Cliff, do you want to touch a little bit on green?
On what, please?
Green
Oh,
initiatives?
the green community,
Yeah.
yes. We talked a little bit earlier about becoming a designated green community. I know in years past when we were talking about doing certain buildings, there appeared to be somewhat of an outrageous buy-in value proposition that would cost the town money. I think these buildings, as Mark said, when we looked at the four of them that the three of us were involved in, they were actually designed not necessarily with solar up on the roof, but abilities to do other things. The greatest of which was to involve Congressman Stephen Lynch in the successful negotiation for a Superfund site. We brought contamination to rejuvenation. And that in and of itself was done with the Neponset River by our side. I have had meetings with Ian Cook of the Neponset River Watershed, and there are possibilities, just possibilities, that we may be able to tie the river into producing some of the electricity that we need for the buildings. Thank you.
So, I will just chime in just briefly. I think that green communities idea has come around in the past. I think the state building code has finally caught up to where most of the things in the Green Communities Act is already in the state building code. And I'm all in favor of making our buildings as efficient with heating, air conditioning, and lighting. And even though we didn't do the stretch code at the three new buildings, we are very close to what would have been approved at some level of the stretch code. We found that it would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through the formal process to be approved as a stretch building, and decided, since the budgets were all tight, it didn't make sense to go through and get formally. But when you look at the stretch checklist, we are so close. We're right there. So those buildings are very efficient, and they're great buildings.
Terrific. Okay, why don't we close
Sure.
with two questions. I'll ask one, and then I'll have Cliff ask the final question. My question, let me just back up a minute. I think anyone who runs for a committee or a board in our town should be commended. These are non-paid jobs. This is a boatload of time that you put up, and I respect anyone who runs for office. As it relates to the select board, your opponent has run for selectman 3 previous times and has lost each time. What attributes, Mark, do you have that you feel connect with the majority of the folks here in Walpole? And what differentiates you from your opponent?
So, I think it's important to talk about real facts, how things were done, why we did them that way. My opponent, in some of his ads and some of the things he has said as an example, he talks about things that are not really facts. They're not true, they're not accurate. I'll throw one out just to, he talks about our taxes have increased 100% over the last 10 years, which is just not true. Any taxpayer can go look at that information and realize that's not true. I'll go back to what makes me a good candidate for selectman is that I can work with other people. I can focus on things that need to be done with other people, and I can help get those things done. So I think for me, that's the thing I'll continue to do, is to work hard for the town and accomplish the important things that Walpole needs to get done.
I'm going to close with asking you, and you've scattered these throughout our conversation intelligently, but knowing you as a planner, knowing you as someone who always has a schedule, what are the 3 priorities as a select board member that you want to accomplish in the next 3 years?
So thanks for asking that question. That's a good one. First is to maintain the important services and safety of the people of Walpole. We've talked about those: seniors, residents, businesses, and children. Second is to be very proactive on the financial security issues. Tightening up our budgets, don't panic, continue to look at everything, keep track of what the state is saying on a week-by-week, month-by-month basis in terms of what aid they're going to provide us, keeping an eye on the COVID aid that they've promised us, using our reserves when we need to, and working with the state for any other potential disaster funding. Also schools, keep the schools strong even though we're cutting back on what the budgets were, keep a focus on infrastructure and improvements through the middle school project. And just keep it together during these hard times and focus on what's important.
Terrific. Before we close, let's take a moment now and go to the town clerk's video regarding voting options.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Gaffey, and I am the town clerk in Walpole. My message to you today is about voting during this COVID-19 pandemic. As you have heard the saying that these are unprecedented times, no truer statement can be made. You have learned that during this pandemic, all of the ways that we are accustomed to doing regular business and running elections is now heavily done through the mail and with an emphasis of requesting a ballot by mail. The situation is still very fluid and changes are constantly being made. The town's first and foremost priority is keeping the citizens of Walpole safe. This includes the town clerk staff and the election workers at our polling locations. To this end, we are strongly encouraging you to vote by mail. There are 3 options for voting this election season. 1, early voting by mail. 2, absentee voting by mail. Or election day voting in person. To vote by mail, the voter can apply for either an absentee ballot or an early voting ballot. Both require an application or any form of written communication request by mail. We need a signature for any and all requests, including the application. To apply for an absentee ballot, you must meet one of the 3 reasons set forth by the state. The first is that you would be out of town on election day. The second is that the voter is physically unable to come to the polling location. This disability has been expanded during this COVID-19 pandemic to include any person taking precaution related to COVID-19 in response to the declared state of emergency or from guidance from a medical professional, local or state health official, or any civil authority. And this is extended until June 30th, 2020. The third reason you can apply for an absentee ballot is for your religious beliefs that prevent you from going to the polling location. A family member of a qualified absentee voter may request an absentee ballot by application or a written note with a signature. After the application is received, the ballot will be mailed to the voter. The voted ballot can be either mailed back to the town clerk's office or delivered to the drop box. If you qualify to vote absentee, you may request the absentee ballot for all elections this year. The second type of voting, early voting by mail, there are no qualifications needed for a voter to apply for an early voting ballot. All registered voters are eligible to participate in early voting. This is a no excuse needed ballot. A family member may not request an early voting ballot for another early voter and may not deliver the ballot on behalf of the early voter to the town clerk's office. Early vote applications are taken out for each election individually and at this time cannot be requested for all elections this year. Both absentee and early vote ballots will be mailed out when we receive your signed request. The absentee and early voting ballot applications are available by clicking the absentee or early voting application on the town clerk website page. In lieu of an application, a note with a signature may be used to request either an absentee or early voting ballot. As always, any questions, please call the town clerk's office. Although we are not open to the public, we are in the office and can answer your questions. The town clerk's phone number is 508-660-7296. Thank you and stay safe.
Welcome back. On behalf of Cliff Snuffer and me, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us for this conversation with Mark Gallivan. I hope that you found it useful as you go to the polls at the end of this month and vote for the Select Board. To you, Mr. Gallivan, best of luck. You have given so much to this fabulous town, and truly, we hope that you never get tired making a significant difference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.